Temtem can be described as a monster taming MMORPG with many parallels to mainline Pokemon titles, but still manages to include enough of its own unique content and mechanics to make it truly its own IP that doesn't shy away from its obvious inspiration. In today's video, we're going to be looking at Temtem as a whole and discuss the three major pillars that in my opinion are integral in creating a holistic monster taming experience. These include the game's story and atmosphere, its gameplay, features and mechanics, and of course the monsters present themselves. We will then amalgamate these aspects together and form a conclusion as to whether or not I believe Temtem is worth the cash. All that being said, if you are a fan of monster taming games like Pokemon and Temtem, definitely consider subscribing to this channel if you like what you see. Today we'll be mostly focusing on the Switch version of the game, but do note that I have played this game both on Steam and Nintendo Switch. Anyways, with all that being said, let's dive in. Alright, so Temtem takes place in a location known as the Airborne Archipelago, which essentially is a set of 6 main islands that are held in place by the sun or the pan-sun in the middle. It's sort of a strange skyland solar system with a bunch of islands orbiting it. You travel from one island to the next in a linear fashion, battling dojos along the way, and an evil team, or in this case, clan, to boot. So obviously, right off the bat, the similarities are apparent. The main tamer, which is your player character, also starts from humble beginnings with their single, this time stepmom, and douchebag rival. That being said, despite the fact that the premise itself is very similar to Pokemon, there are definitely some differences when it comes to how the story is portrayed and what actually goes down that are of note. I won't go too heavily into spoilers, but the game has been out for over a month and we're kind of looking back on it, so there will definitely be some. So a few examples of story elements that I could never see in a Pokemon game, at least at the forefront, as opposed to something in the background that the player doesn't actually participate in themselves, include a war, and no, you didn't actually participate in the AZ Floette one, so shush. Human character death, terrorism, and stuff like that. Despite the bubbly appearance of the game, there are actually some really dark tones from time to time, and they're a lot more in your face than something like Pokemon, where most of it's either hidden in backstory or in the Pokedex. Again, without giving too much away, the characters were okay in my opinion. Not too many of them stood out beyond the enemies and rival character though. First, let's talk about the rival, and again, mild spoilers about their character development. Right from the beginning, Max is quite literally the worst. This isn't like Blue being cocky or Silver being a jerk but also having conviction. Max is literally just jealous that you get more attention than they do and is mad. Pretty much everything they do in the game is because of this jealousy, and even though they try to have some semblance of a redemption arc for the character, I do feel that it completely falls flat and is very, very forced. People who have beaten the game or have been following my Let's Play will know exactly what I'm talking about, so I'll leave it at that. The Bisloba members themselves aren't super special either, but General X looks kind of like King Bradley, and he does one of the best things ever in the game, so he's pretty distinct, but in general, the main Bisloba villains are pretty distinct and memorable. With Lottie, we have an upper class woman who thinks she's better than everyone, Hamajo is your crazy scientist, and General X is a war-crazed general who basically just enjoys combat. The Dojo Masters honestly didn't stand out to me too much as well. What I found about Temtem, there is a lot of dialogue that just doesn't feel like it needs to be there, especially when trainers are battling you, and while you can skip it, it does get a little bit tedious, even in story moments where there's very relevant information being discussed. For some reason, it just falls flat. I can't really explain why I feel such a disinterest in a lot of parts of the story, but this is a very subjective opinion, so take with it what you will, and if you felt similarly and maybe have a better reason than my sort of strange apathy towards a lot of the dialogue, let me know down below. I have a hard time putting my finger on it. So in each island you travel to, it sort of contains its own mini arc, which also lends relevance to the overarching narrative of crushing Bisloba, but I don't want to go too deep into spoiler territory here because I've actually covered each major island update in more depth as they came out in several different island reviews linked below, which I do suggest you check out. Obvious spoiler warnings for those because they do go pretty deep. In terms of Temtem's gameplay, features, and mechanics, this is where the game really sets itself apart from Pokemon, even though it may not seem like that at a first glance. So first of all, Temtem's battle system, while similar to Pokemon in that it's turn-based, has its own completely unique caveats. Firstly, all battles take place in doubles format. This is true for both the endgame story and the competitive scene. This to me is nice because it adds consistency between the two. I've said this in past videos, but something about the fact that Pokemon's official competitive scene is doubles whilst the entire game is singles always rubbed me the wrong way, and this is a big part of the reason why I personally like to play Smogon singles when I do play Pokemon competitively, because it's what I'm used to and what I've grown up with. Temtem battles don't feature a PP system, but instead a stamina system that rewards strategic play. You can use moves that will exhaust a Temtem past their current stamina amount, but you will be punished with overexertion damage, so you can really play around this. Every move in the game also features its own priority, which dictates how fast the move will be, and unlike Pokemon, where priority is sort of an absolute, Temtem's priority is instead something that multiplies against the Temtem's speed rather than having priority tiers. Moves also feature a hold, which if present will dictate how many turns you have to wait before you can use a certain move over again, so you can't just spam it. I made a combat system video a while back, which you can check out if you're interested, that essentially explores the system as it is, but just know that it's very different than Pokemon and is completely RNG free. There's no critical hits, no random missing chance, no random status infliction, etc. Depending on your playstyle, this is going to depend on whether or not you find that advantageous. Some players will note that having RNG makes battles feel more unique and different, while others will say not having it can make battles feel stale, whilst others will state that non-RNG is the most competitive way to play, and this is just something that's going to come down to your personal preference. I like both ways of doing things, and I feel like they have their own different strengths and weaknesses, so I'm a bit of a middleman on this. One of my complaints regarding combat is that early on in the game, the moves the Temtem learn use up a lot of stamina, so they end up needing to rest very frequently, or you kind of got to avoid using them altogether. In my Switch playthrough, for example, for the longest time, I couldn't even get a hypnosis off with Howchick after using Kick on turn 1 because it would use up more stamina, causing me to not have enough to use it the next turn. This move has a hold, so even if I were to avoid using Kick on turn 1, I'd have to rest on the first turn, which slows down gameplay, then use it, then still be completely out of stamina, so I'd have to rest the next turn again. Now, combat is actually just one aspect to the game because it does also play in an MMO format and has some features associated with it. Firstly, there's a guild mechanic, which allows you to join a guild, participate in club battles, take control of dojos. Then you have a layer system, which allows you to join up with multiple players and tackle a pretty straightforward dungeon area with the goal of getting to the end. You have a co-op mode, which allows you to go on an adventure with a friend. You have housing, you have the chat, you have different emotes, player customization, etc. It's definitely not anything close to RuneScape with the amount of MMO features, and the devs have stated that that wasn't their goal to begin with, but it definitely has the basics. Back to the single player experience, I'll definitely say that the game feels a lot better now that the devs have made roughly 20% of the previously unavoidable trainer battles avoidable. When I play something like Pokemon, I tend to battle almost every trainer, but with Temtem, I feel like there was way more trainers than in a Pokemon game, even in the beginning routes, and it definitely felt like the trainer battles would drag on. In-game progression feels pretty good now. I never felt like I was super underleveled to begin with, and even in cases where there were Temtems that were higher levels than mine, you can still stand a chance against them. Honestly, when it comes to Temtem, I think if you're someone who's looking for a game with less RNG in an MMO setting, it really excels in this department. Oh, by the way, did I also mention that Temtem has a battle frontier? It's called the Temtem Paradise, and essentially what it lets you do is participate in a bunch of different battle modes, which I was actually even hoping for, like a roguelike facility where you basically go through randomized dungeons and have to try not to black out, a rental facility allowing you to literally do no preparation and just jump in, and a few others as well. This is the type of endgame content I want to see more games put out. As of right now, there are also plans in December to add Temtem Showdown, which is like a battle simulator, and other post-game activities as well. Alright, so it wouldn't really be a monster taming review without discussing the focal point of any mon game, that being the collectible creatures found within them. Temtem has a relatively mid-sized roster as far as monster taming games are concerned, with it roughly having 165 in total. Some of these belong to 2 or 3 stage lines, which of course brings the roster of fully evolved Temtems down further. That said, this is still more than the original roster of Pokemon, for example, and for such a small roster, they actually have a ton of interesting dual types like electric and crystal, fire and water, water and grass, etc. I think where the roster really shines is with its digital type, where you can find a ton of mechanical Temtem, ranging from what look like robots to those designed more like digital animals. While I personally wouldn't put the roster as a whole at the top of the genre, I also do think that there are a large amount of fantastic designs, and of course, some stinkers as well. Some of my favorites include Nidrasil, Sizemunch, Ori, and this dope Dragon Boy. So to conclude, in terms of the game's story, I will say that I found it to be rather middling, something you'd probably expect to see in a Pokemon game, but with less interesting background lore in my opinion, but does include some darker undertones. The game's battle system is unique and very well put together, and the monster roster is pretty good. A Switch-specific issue I ran into a lot, even now after the latest update, is that the Switch just likes to crash a lot. Like, I've had the game crash on me in the very last episode of our Let's Play, which isn't even out as of the time this video is going live, where right when we beat the final boss, who I'm not going to spoil here, we just had a crash. And that has happened throughout the entire Let's Play. I have not cut these out, because I do feel like it's very important to outline. But the Switch version definitely seems like it's the least well put together of all of the platforms. That being said, is Temtem worth the price? Well, let's talk about it. First of all, the price is going to vary based on region, but in Canada, the game's about $60, whereas a standard non-indie game is about $80. Think about Pokemon titles. I believe Temtem's American price is around 45 USD. So while the game isn't as expensive as a Pokemon title and definitely has more content than any of the Switch ones, it's also not cheap either. It's gonna come down to what your preferences are. The game's an MMO, so requires constant server maintenance and you have to be online at all times. That's also something that's not cheap, so they have cosmetic battle passes to compensate, which also has been a point of contention from fans, but it is important to note from the very beginning, the devs have been clear about this, and there is no pay-to-win mechanic. So if you're looking for a Pokemon-esque experience with MMO elements and RNG-free PvP, there's a lot of fun to be had here. I honestly don't regret paying for the game whatsoever, and have said many times in the past that while not a perfect game, does have a lot of fun and is pretty high quality from a fidelity standpoint. It has a lot of story content and will take around 40 hours to beat, so keep that in mind as well. So yeah, I hope this review was useful to you guys. If you want a more in-depth look specifically at each island, we had Kisiwa, Cipanku, and Arbury release reviews, so check those out in the description box. And if you are a fan of monster taming games, don't forget to like and subscribe for more daily monster taming videos. You can also check out my Twitter, my Discord, and my Patreon linked below. Special thanks to the patrons, especially Jim Hamilton, Dark Persona, Dro Ghost, and Exodus, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.